Good morning and welcome back to the channel Inside Podcast. I'm your host Dinara, and in today's episode, we're going to discuss how to pursue your dreams and never give up, and also what it takes to write a book. And I'm absolutely thrilled to introduce you to my guest, Luigi Kohli, who is a true believer in the power of dreams to change the world and the author of the new historical fiction novel called Alethea. Welcome to the show, Luigi.
Thank you, Tanara, for inviting me to talk to you today. Looking forward to it.
It's a pleasure. Luigi, I read your autobiography and you have such an interesting journey. So, you grew up in London, you have the degree in engineering, had your own firm, did the MBA, you joined the workforce in the corporate world, and for nearly 30 years, you developed strategies and services, which is fantastic. And then, after nearly 30 years of employment, you decided to pursue your dream and write a novel which you had always wanted to write since teens. So tell me about it. What is it about this story that compelled you to write it, and why is it such a lifelong ambition of yours? Where does it come from?
That's a really good question. And you could ask, why did I wait 30 years to write it? It was a lifetime ambition because as a child, I was an avid reader of books, particularly those in the historical context, fiction, historical context, or science fiction. So I loved Isaac Asimov. I was a big reader of Tolkien, David Gemmell, and in later years, Ken Follett, a whole range of authors. And I loved being immersed in a different world and learning something about another time or another place. So I loved books, and I really admired a storyteller's ability to bring me to his place. And I thought, wow, having the ability to take a reader through a journey that I have in my mind, that is really powerful. Didn't really believe I had the ability to do it, but thought, mate, one day I would love to write the story. In that time of my life, I was a big movie fan as well. And in particular, epics. I loved epic movies from the 50s and the 60s. So maybe the older generation who are watching this video would know about Quo Vadis or Spartacus or, any of those kind of movies. And my favorite movie of all time of that generation was Ben-Hur because of the storytelling and the script. And that compelled me to read the book by Lew Wallace upon which the film is based. And the stories have similarities, but the book is quite different in terms of the ending. Hollywood's got the ability to glamorize stories, right? So I went back to the source material. And it's written at a time in history which is quite momentous. If you think about what the ancient Romans were doing 2,000 years ago, they were coming to the peak of their powers and their expansionist goals in Eastern Europe. And also you had the introduction of Christianity and the impact that had on the region, from a disruptive perspective. And because I loved the story so much, I felt passionately that Lew Wallace left the story in an ideal place where someone else could pick it up and take it on. And I thought that could be me. Maybe a bit presumptuous. Maybe somebody else might have got to it before me, but I thought I would love to write that story. And that's why it became a personal goal.
They say everyone has a story to tell and everyone is a writer. Some stories are written in books, some stories are confined to hearts. How did you start?
I started with something I felt passionate about, and I think that's really important. Don't constrain yourself by taking too little risk and trying to be too comfortable where you begin. Start with something that you're really passionate about, because that's like rocket fuel to keep you going throughout your writing experience. You'll come across lots of challenges, lack of knowledge, people who say that's too ambitious, naysayers. You'll always find people who say you should maybe write something that's a bit easier the first time around. And I think passion will compensate for a lot of those doubts that you have. Writing blocks, I had a few of those along the journey as well. Yeah, so it comes from my religious background and my passion for the story that was Ben-Hur.
That's interesting. And who is your ideal reader? Who is your target audience? And also, did you have to do a lot of research about the history, because it ties into the historical fiction?
Yeah.
So tell us about it.
I would say I didn't really think too much originally about my target audience because I wasn't writing the book necessarily with a specific audience in mind. It was a personal goal of my own. So I was writing it for myself initially. But obviously, in growing up, was influenced by the writers that I mentioned. And so anybody who is a big fan of historical fiction set in ancient times, whether it's Greeks or the Romans or Phoenicians or whatever, is interested to learn more about the time, but in the context of a fictional story, I think would enjoy this. So there is no age profile. It's more about people who have curiosity about times past and what they can tell us about what's going on in the world today, and human behaviour. So that's it's a bit maybe a generic answer that you weren't expecting, but that's the truth. Now, I started by writing it for myself, but I think it would appeal to anybody who's interested in history.
I can't wait to read the book myself. On the channel Inside Podcast, we talk a lot about technology and AI technologies. Did you use any AIs, chatbots, to help you with the tone and voice, maybe correcting the grammar,
Mm-hmm.
the lexical style?
Well, that's quite an interesting question because I have a friend who has published a number of books. I was having a conversation with him recently, actually.
Mm-hmm.
He was asking my advice about AI, and the use of AI to generate art, and in particular, either book covers or images within a book. He's a fantasy writer, and he doesn't necessarily have the connections or a budget to commission an established artist to produce artwork for his books. And we were having a dialogue about the ethics and the moral positions one should take maybe on using AI. How did I feel about it personally?
Mm-hmm.
And I basically said to him, I think AI has a place in art creation. For
Mm-hmm.
me personally, I commissioned Paul Young, who is quite an established artist on a range of genres, and I quite like some of the book covers he's done on books that I've read. I was actually quite lucky to secure him, but I wanted my book covers to represent specific scenes within my book, and I just felt personally it would be good to get an artist to do that. My friend's not in that position. So I basically said to him, if it's a generic cover for feel and tone, I don't see any harm in using AI for that. You don't have a budget. You couldn't commission an artist to do it anyway. What alternatives do you have? So I think AI in those circumstances might have a place. I personally didn't use it for the artwork. I did try at the beginning. Maybe my efforts were a bit clumsy. Nothing came out as I expected. And the more I explored it, I'm by no means a guru in using AI for artwork. Maybe I lack the technical skills. But the more I tried, the more I felt passionate about asking and commissioning an artist to do the work, because I felt quite strongly a book cover tells a lot to the prospective reader about, the story.
Yeah.
And I wanted it to be as close to the story as possible.
Yeah.
So for the artwork, I definitely didn't use AI for the writing. I think that has to come from the soul of the author. So I definitely didn't use it for writing. Two things I did and will use it for are fact checking. So to come back to an earlier question that you asked that I didn't actually answer directly about the research, I think
Mm-hmm.
one of my learning points on the journey is, especially if you're focusing on a story that's driven by passion rather than something that's happened to you personally, research is really important because the reader will see and understand more about the story and feel more engaged in the story. If the author's writing from a position of strength, it will feel more real, it will feel more genuine. So research is really important. And although I did probably the best part of 12 to 15 months of detailed research, not just on the internet, but also I went to Israel. I was lucky enough to go there and visit the Holy Land in 2022 before
Mm-hmm.
all of the current troubles. There's a reasonable amount of useful detail in the book that I have that I wanted to make sure is accurate. So I used AI to fact check some of the details in the story so it's as accurate as possible. And I think AI is really good for that, trawling the internet and coming back with things that are factually correct. The other thing that I will be using it for is online advertising.
Okay.
With everybody searching for interesting stories to read online,
Mm-hmm.
with social media, etc., being really important, especially to self-publishing authors. I think that's going to be a really useful tool to reach people that I'm not connected with, to reach a wide audience. And the AI solution that I'm choosing to use is, as you might expect, is an adaptive one that also uses big data. So what it will do over a period of months will be to advertise my book to readers who read the same kind of genre or have been recently searching for books in and around my area. And then based on the reaction from the recipient to the advert, will adapt the content of the advert to what is encouraging people to click through to the story. So, each iteration of the process to get my book in front of prospective readers will improve over time. That's the theory.
Yes.
We'll see how that works in practice. So I think for fact checking and maybe getting your book in front of prospective clients, AI is a useful tool.
Absolutely. And I think you can also use AI for localizing your book into different languages. Are you planning to advertise this book and translate it into other languages?
That's an interesting one. I think it might be a bit challenging for my kind of novel because it's written at a time which was 2,000 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
I've opted, and I found this quite challenging, but I've opted to write the story using a language that would make the reader feel of the time. So it's not your typical English language novel. It uses quite old words and is written in a style that makes you feel like you're in a world in the ancient past. So I don't actually know how well AI from a translation point of view will cope with old English and just turns of phrase that you don't use in modern language. I might be wrong, and there might be some really good tools that can do that. But at the moment, even basic translation, if readers will be, viewers of this YouTube video will be familiar with platforms like LinkedIn, where people post, say, in Swedish, and there's a translation button, and it will convert
Yes.
to English. I mean, even that's only 95% completely accurate. There are still errors in that. So I'm not convinced for my type of novel. If it's something more contemporary, yeah, AI has a place there.
Or maybe we combine AI for rough translations and then get a content editor in the native language to review it. Now that's an idea for you.
Yeah.
Great. So you mentioned some online advertising and marketing. Are there any events planned for offsite meetings, maybe signing your book or any events?
Yep. So as I say, it's my first novel, so it's my first foray into publishing. So I'm learning as I'm going, really.
Yeah.
I haven't gone gung-ho. I've started small. So the book's released on the 28th of April, as you mentioned. However, I have an agreement with Waterstones to do a in-store book launch, which is on the 18th of April. So I'll do a kind of a meet and greet the author and book signing in one store to begin with, see how that goes, learn from the process of advertising that kind of event, and then potentially do other events in other destinations. I know I've spoken to you offline about potentially Winchester, given its historical context, would be a good place. York would be another interesting place to potentially try. But so I'll take it slowly.
Definitely.
I mean, I love the story that I wrote, and I hope other readers who read the book will love the story as well. But you don't know, right? It's never going to appeal to everybody. So it may be successful or it may not. Who knows?
I'm sure it's going to be a great success for you, and I'm here to help you. Also, how many pages are there in your book?
Well, when I wrote the book originally, so in its first draft, it was one book, and based on the application I was using to write the book, it was about 900 pages. However, I've subsequently come to realize through the publishing and typesetting process that it would have, had I gone down the route of just publishing it as one book, it would have been well over 1,000 pages. And I think that's a bit too much to ask readers to wade through, especially with a new author that they're not familiar with. I think Tolkien could get away with it, but not me, or Ken Follett even. So I've divided the book into two parts. So each book will be about 500 pages when it's done. And the division in the book was actually quite fortuitous because it spans 12 years. So the story I tell covers 12 years, and right in the middle of the story, there's a 4-year break. So that was quite a neat coincidence enabled me to divide the book in two without having to do much work to do that.
Do you know a lot of readers these days, millennials and the next generations, they like audiobooks.
Mm.
Are you planning to launch an audiobook as well at some point?
Well, that would depend on the success of the ebooks and the paperback, to be honest, because I haven't gone down the agent route. I had tried. Anybody who's ever tried to get themselves published will know exactly what I'm talking about. It is not just hard work, it's really difficult to find an agent. Even if you've written a well-scripted book, it has to land with the right agent who's looking for that particular genre at that particular moment in time, because they like to fill their own personal portfolio with a range of authors. And if it doesn't fit what they're looking for, they won't take you on, irrespective of the quality of the writing, etc. So I've self-published with Troubadour Publishing. They also just don't take any old author. They have a selection process, but you pay to have your book published once they've agreed to take your work on. And audiobooks are quite expensive, relatively speaking. To create an ebook, relatively inexpensive, paperbacks more expensive, and audiobooks more expensive still. So I would definitely go up the audiobook route if there seems to be an appetite for the content that I've created.
Mm-hmm.
But not before then, I don't think.
It would be good. I'd like to dig a little bit more into the technicalities of writing a book. What advice could you give to an aspiring author? As I said, a lot of people would like to write a book, but it's always the first step that is difficult to take.
That's also true. A good friend of mine, when I was in the corporate world, because I always talked a lot about wanting to write this particular story, a friend of mine gave me a little notebook, and she said, I think it was a birthday present, and she said, when you have ideas, write them down. Because eventually when you come to write your book, you are going to have to get off to a quick start and be very disciplined about your writing and, you know, what you should do. Not that she was a guru on this by any stretch. This was just her advice. Make sure you write a certain number of pages a day, etc. But you have to make a start, because otherwise you could be waiting for a long time. My advice would be start with identifying something that you're passionate about and do your research, as I mentioned at the beginning. And then when you start to write your first words, have the discipline to put yourself in a room, which is your space, because you'll be amazed at how important space, a familiar space, is to writing. I have a room upstairs. It's a bedroom which I converted into a study. And it's amazing after 2 or 3 months, when you get into the habit of entering the room and sitting in front of your screen and then writing onto a blank page effectively, how easy it becomes to start to write when you're in a familiar surroundings. It's a bit daunting initially, but after a month, it's just walking in the room and closing the door behind you. It almost changes your mindset. So finding the right kind of space to write is also very important. And I think having the discipline to sit there until you've written a number of pages. So it will never be perfect the first time you write it. That's not really the main point. The main point is to write what you're thinking, and then come back to it the following day and refine it. But don't try and write the perfect thing the first time. I think that's one lesson that I learned. I was so preoccupied with wanting to write the perfect thing the first time through. I wasted so much time in doing that, and it's not necessary. And I was also advised, I was very lucky, in fact, through a friend of a friend, to meet an author who writes very well. He wrote the Last Templar and a number of other well-known books. I was lucky to meet him through a friend of a friend, and he gave me many good tips. One which I've taken with me, which I would encourage all first-time authors to do, is to read the book by Stephen King on how to write. It's only about 200-300 pages, and he shares his journey in writing, and there are so many really useful tips. And the one key one, I would say, is don't start to write a story knowing how it's all going to happen. That was my mistake. So in the beginning, when I started to set out to write my book, I already knew the ending. That in itself is not a bad thing, because it gives you something to aim for. But I also knew all the steps. And I thought I knew all the characters and how I was going to get from A to B to C. So it was all very structured. That's part of my engineering background. That's how I approached the book. And that was a bit of a mistake, to be honest. That's how I started. I probably read Stephen King's book 3 or 4 chapters in when I'd started. And the piece of advice he gave me, which I would give to all other newbie writers, is don't do what I did, which is know all the answers from the beginning. His advice was that you need to be more like an archaeologist. So you start with an idea and you scratch around the edges. And as you scratch, more of the story reveals itself. So much as an archaeologist does, right? They do the dig, and more of what it is that they're uncovering reveals itself. You think as a newbie author, you're taking a risk because it sounds a bit bizarre. How can I start writing a story with just an idea? You know, it could go anywhere, but that's the fun of it. You know, that's the creativity of it, and you'll be surprised. And it proved to be the case for me as well. All of the people that I wanted in my story were in the story, but there were at least 6, 7 characters who ended up being in the book that I didn't even conceive of when I first started my writing in my first words.
So it comes during the process.
It evolved, yeah.
It evolves. Oh, that's interesting.
Entire chapters that I had to write because my story took me off in a certain direction that I hadn't envisaged. So yeah, don't overthink what it is that you think you want to write. Here I'm talking about fiction.
Flow.
Yeah, absolutely. Have faith that your brain will take you in the right direction and your creativity will manifest itself on the page.
Very insightful as well. So Luigi, what does success look like for you?
Partly, I think, just getting the book published and out there and having written the book. I think it was quite daunting at the beginning. If you think about the story of Ben-Hur, younger generations probably only know it through the film, and even then the remake that was done maybe 15 years ago. But just taking on that mammoth task of trying to write something to follow up on Lew Wallace's work, which, by the way, was the biggest selling novel in the 1800s in the US, equal to Uncle Tom's Cabin, which maybe a lot of people have heard of. So it was quite a daunting task for me. My book's not written in his style, but it's continuing a story which people may be familiar with. So just writing the story and having completed it, I think I consider that a personal success for me. And although as I mentioned earlier on in this interview, I originally wrote the book for myself, I found as I was writing it, a sort of a yearning, maybe too strong a word, a desire for other people to come on the journey with me and to also feel the story with me, and hopefully they can feel the passion. So another element of success would be the number of books, whether it's ebooks or paperback, that I'm actually able to sell. I'm not that interested in making money from selling it, and anybody who's in self-publishing knows you're never going to get rich selling books by publishing yourself, right? So for me, it's not about the money. It's about how many readers I can reach, how many minds and ears are going to read, see, and hear my story through their own voice. That will be, and if I can get to a modest, 1,000, I'll be very happy with that. A lot of people who I've spoken to think that's a bit too modest. Why did you do all that work just to reach 1,000 readers? Well, as I said, it wasn't originally for them, it was for me.
It's a personal goal you had, a long-term ambition, exactly, and an inspiration, and it's a great achievement. I mean, it's incredible. Who knows, maybe you left the corporate world in order to write this book, right?
Yes.
That was your personal accomplishment. No, that's really very inspiring. So, and what's next?
Well, in line with what I was saying earlier about where your creativity takes you. So I'd written the book originally as 1, now 2, as I mentioned. And as I was writing the epilogue to the second book, my brain was already thinking about how the story might continue. So I think from a personal point of view, I'm probably already committing myself to write a third, so it becomes a trilogy. Even if the first 2 books aren't commercially successful, I still personally would like to finish the story in a way that the epilogue, and as I was writing it, was taking me towards. Again, it was an unexpected twist I found myself in. So I would like to do that. And then, because it was quite challenging in the sense that it constrains my use of language to old world English, I'd like to write something that's a bit freer, where I can express myself a bit more freely. and use more modern language. And I'd like to try a different genre. So whether that's science fiction, which I already have a story idea for science fiction, or a crime thriller, write another couple of books.
Fantastic. Wow. And I can't wait to read those as well and invite you to the next show about your other books, hopefully. Did you have any family support on your journey in terms of writing a book? And also, how long did it take you to complete your book?
Well, family support is very important. I mean, I'm lucky in the sense that I took early retirement, so I had time available. It's not like I was writing a book and also in a full-time job. But the family support was important in terms of, even from my wife's perspective, I would lock myself in the room for my writing time, which for me happens to be in the mornings, from 8 o'clock till lunchtime, and she wouldn't see me. So even if she wanted to go out somewhere or wanted me to do something, she was very accommodating. She was also very happy to read drafts of copy. So having someone close to you that understands you and is going to give you honest feedback. I think family are the ones that can give you honest feedback because they know you won't take it personally and they want you to do the best work that you can. My daughter also she's not an artist, but she did art at school at A level. So she helped me with some of the maps that are in the book. So she helped me with that. So that's from a family perspective. But beyond that, I had a larger group of friends who also acted as proofreaders and critics.
Mm-hmm.
Would I recommend it? Possibly. Have a small community around you that are happy to proofread your work, comment on plot lines. Sometimes that's quite useful because you can be over detailed or over complex in your plots and the plot twists. So what I think is a breadcrumb trail of a plot twist that people can follow. Sometimes I would give that to proofreaders to come back to me on, and I would ask them, did you pick up on the clues? And they said, no. What clue? Because I'd maybe gone a bit too subtle. Having a group of people around you who can give you feedback and guide you on your journey, I think that's quite useful. And I'm so appreciative of the time and the effort because it's not a small task. I would set a routine of giving them something every month to read, as much to keep them engaged as to give me the discipline to produce content.
Mm-hmm.
But their support was invaluable and encouragement as well.
And in terms of the timelines, did it take you 2 years to write this book?
Well, if you mean from germ of idea to printed page on a bookshelf, I would say 3 years.
3 years since you opened that door in a comfortable setting.
Absolutely.
Until today, it took you 3 years.
I mean, the self-publishing process in itself is a good 6 months. Even when you've done the manuscript and the story's finished from a writer's perspective, it's at least 6 months.
And I hope that our audience will read your book and write great stellar reviews. It has been fantastic, Luigi, having you on the show today. We've learned so much from you, and I wish you good luck with the launch of your book. And if I can help, I'll be happy to do it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Tanara. Appreciate it.